These are 10 underrated cards in Tarkir Dragonstorm Draft. You can snag these late in packs and use them to win your games. First up is Spectral Denial. For X into blue, you get an instant that says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control with power 4 or greater, counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So it's a counter spell that can scale with the game because as your opponent has more mana available to pay for the X, you will also have more mana available to make that X a bigger number. So it's going to be able to generally trade with one of your opponent's cards on the stack, and oftentimes even at a mana advantage, because if your opponent is on turn 5 trying to play a 5 mana spell, you can counter this for 2 mana or even 1 mana sometimes if you have a creature with power 4 or greater to get that discount, which is really, really valuable to have. Because if that ever happens, you've gotten a huge mana advantage to be able to take over the game. And even if you don't get a big mana advantage, you're still stopping your opponent's really good spells with your essentially removal spell before the creature or spell can come into play. So if you're countering a creature that has an enters the battlefield effect or something like that, it all of a sudden doesn't get value. So it's almost as if you're getting value from your counter spell by stopping your opponent's value. So instead of your opponent's creature coming into play, you using a kill spell on it, you're stopping it on the stack before it can generate any value at all, which is really, really valuable to have in a set that has as many value creatures as Dragonstorm Tarkir. And also just being able to stop card draw spells, removal spells, things like that is also really nice. Counter spells are a good place to be in this format, and you'll be happy taking Spectral Denial and putting it in your deck. Next up is another counterspell that may be the most underrated card in the entire set. Dispelling Exhale is 1 in a blue for an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. If a dragon was beheld, counter that spell unless its controller pays 4 instead. So all of the stuff we just said about Spectral Denial applies to this card. Being able to trade 2 mana for your opponent's expensive cards that maybe cost 4 or 5 mana is really, really good. Also being able to answer things on curve by spending 2 mana to counter their 2 drops or 3 drops even in a lot of scenarios can also be good if you need that as a mode. And because of the Behold a Dragon mode, this card does scale into the late game pretty well because you are going to be able to get enough dragons in your deck if you prioritize them, and by doing so you'll be able to turn this into a hard counter spell almost in the late game because paying 4 is really, really expensive. If they're trying to play a 4 drop, being able to counter unless they pay 4 is going to counter it until the extreme late game, and hopefully you're going to be able to use your cards and leverage them before they become completely dead. But that does not happen as often, and so generally Dispelling Exhale is going to stop the cards you care about and be a really, really good interactive spell. Definitely snag these if you see them and be happy playing them. Next is Riverwalk Technique, another card that has a counterspell mode on it. Hopefully you're starting to see a trend, and it will help you value these cards higher by seeing that all of them are pretty solid. So 3 in a blue for an instant, choose one. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it on their choice of the top or bottom of their library, or counter target non-creature spells. So that counter spell mode is going to come up more than you might think. There are powerful removal spells, card draw options. There are some non-creature spells that are like bomb rares because they're enchantments or artifacts or things like that. And so there are, or planeswalkers, there are things that you are going to want to counter that are non-creature spells, and you should definitely be aware of those. Also, the fact that you get a removal spell tacked on, this is just kind of like a removal spell because it puts it into the opponent's library. So it's not like it bounces it to their hand, which would be card disadvantage for you because they don't have to redraw the card. Because they have to waste a draw step redrawing the card if they do choose to put it on top of their library, this does function as a removal spell. So that modality is really nice to have. And while you don't want to fill your deck with Riverwalk Techniques, having a couple copies is definitely going to be nice, and they are going late in packs. Next up is Mardu Devotee. This little 1-drop does just what you're looking for in your aggressive Mardu decks, and is a card that you should be prioritizing as a result because it really does tie together that deck perfectly. So for 1 mana, you get a 1/2 Human Scout. When it enters Scry 2, and critically, you can pay 1 to add red, white, or black, activate only once each turn. So in your Mardu aggressive decks, you're really going to want to curve out, apply pressure to your opponents, and make sure you deploy your cards on time. And that can be tricky in a deck that has access to potentially 2 colors and a splash or things like that. And so Mardu Devotee comes down on turn 1, makes sure that you can deploy your Mardu spells by giving you that filtering mode, and it helps you set up your draws with that Scry 2 mode. And so also filling the battlefield can be relevant for going wide or things like that. And overall, this is a card you should be taking very highly if you're in Mardu because it's the perfect start to a game, and you really do want to get the aggro started on turn 1 if possible in your Mardu decks. And fixing is even more premium in color combinations that don't have access to green, so Mardu is a color combo that's really happy to get this Devotee. Speaking of premium fixing for color combinations that are not green, Mardu Monument is also a card you should be taking highly in your drafts if you're trying to play Mardu. You might think, hey, turn 2 is not the turn I want to be taking off in my Mardu deck. I want to be using this turn to get down my aggressive creatures, but you are still very happy to play premium fixing in your Mardu decks to be able to splash those powerful cards in whichever color is your splash color. So if you're playing a red-white deck and have a really powerful black card to splash, Mardu Monument is going to be a really good source of that black splash. And keep in mind, you don't have to play it on turn 2. If you have a 2-drop to deploy, you can play the Mardu Monument a little bit later. And that 5-mana mode is really, really nice. And one thing that's really important to note is that you don't have to lose those warrior creature tokens at the end of the turn. A lot of the cards in the set that make these 1/1 red warrior creature tokens are mobilized cards, which means you sacrifice those 1/1s at the end of your turn. Mardu Monument, those warriors stick around. So keep that in mind. You can sacrifice it for 5 mana, create 3 1/1 red warrior creature tokens. They gain menace and haste until end of turn, and then they just stick around forever. And then, of course, when it enters, you get the mountain, plains, or swamp to be that mana fixing. So don't sleep on the Mardu Monument. This fixing that is in the non-green color combinations is really good, as we shall see now with Jeskai Monument, which is another one of these monuments for the other clan that does not touch on green. So it can get an island, mountain, or plains card when it comes into play for just that 2 mana, and then you can spend 4 mana to sacrifice it, create 2 1/1 bird creature tokens with flying. So it is going to be able to affect the board state and in a relatively meaningful way by getting you some flyers. So Jeskai Monument is a really premium card for your Jeskai decks, and definitely one that you're going to be happy playing, because once again, that's a color combination that doesn't get access to any additional fixing from green, which makes any fixing that is available for the color combination a little bit more premium. Next, we're going to be talking about even more fixing, the gain land. So Tranquil Cove is an example of one of these lands. It is entering the battlefield tapped. When it enters, you gain 1 life, and then it taps for white or blue. In this case, there is a cycle of 10 of these. Now, a lot of players know that these cards are good in this set once you are already in a certain color combination and you want to get fixing for them. So in that sense, the cards are probably more likely to be properly rated than some of the cards on this list. However, where they are currently underrated is when you don't actually know what your colors are going to be, because if you're not playing a green-white deck or you're not touching on those colors, it's hard to justify taking a Blossoming Sands, for example, over a card that you could potentially maybe use as a fringe playable in your sideboard. But taking these lands, even when you don't have a use for them yet, just opens up so many doors, so many possibilities later in the draft. So imagine you're a blue-red deck or something like that, and you don't currently have any green cards or any white cards. It's still really valuable to take a card like Rugged Highlands, which taps for red or green, over a card that you might even be including as like your 20 or 21st playable in a lot of situations, because having access to that Rugged Highlands, if you do get a reason to go into Teamer, can just be the difference between being able to play your powerful bomb that you get and not being able to play it. So these cards are definitely worth taking if there's just nothing available in the pack that you're particularly hyped about, even if it's not a color that you think you're going to play yet, because there are so many powerful, colorful options in the packs that you can still gain benefits by taking these cards a little bit higher than the people around you in the draft pod. And by ending up with a few of these lands, it's going to open up so many possibilities for you later in the draft. Definitely don't sleep on these cards. Even if you've been told, take the lands, take the lands, take the lands, you should still probably be taking them a little bit higher. So they're still probably a little bit underrated. Next up is Dragonstorm Globe. This card does not look like much. 3 mana, each dragon you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, tap to add 1 mana of any color. It ends up playing out really well because a lot of decks have 2 to 3, maybe even 4 dragons in them, and having them come in with an extra piece of stats on them, those +1/+1 counters, really does add up. And the fact that this can tap for a mana of any color means that it really does help fix your mana for splashes, especially if you are playing maybe a 2-color deck that splashes a couple of cards of different colors. This really does tie the room together, and especially with the dragons in the set, the extra stats really do matter, puts them out of range of some of the removal spells that can sometimes answer them via damage, things like that. And so the Globe is definitely a card that playing 1 copy is going to be pretty good in a lot of decks, and if you have a lot of colors, then maybe you could even get away with playing 2. Just make sure if you do put this card in your deck, you have some good ways to use your mana so you don't just top deck this and then wish you had spells instead of land, like a card that essentially functions as a land in the late game. But if you're a colorful deck, if you have some dragons, this card is going to serve you well. Next up is Dragonstorm Forecaster, so a card that plays well with the Dragonstorm Globe. This is the sort of card that's really easy to sleep on. It's a 1 mana 0/3. It has 2 tap, search your library for a card named Dragonstorm Globe or Boulder-Born Dragon, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So Dragonstorm Globe, the card that we just discussed, that card is pretty solid and a card that you'd be pretty happy putting in your deck anyway in a lot of cases. So being able to search that up, pretty good. Boulder-Born Dragon, on the other hand, is a pretty bad card. It's the 5 mana artifact dragon. It's a 3/3 with flying and vigilance. When it attacks, you surveil 1. That card is a little bit understated, but the fact that you can oftentimes just get it out of your deck for free if you have a Dragonstorm Forecaster means that you will be fairly happy playing one copy of it in your Dragonstorm Forecaster decks, because the play pattern of turn 1 Dragonstorm Forecaster, turn 2 search up a Dragonstorm Globe, turn 3 play the Dragonstorm Globe, turn 4 ramp out your Boulder-Born Dragon and have it come into play as a 4/4 is just a pretty good one, and gives you a nice little package of cards that can be a 1-card engine if you just happen to draw that Dragonstorm Forecaster in your opening hand. You can get Dragonstorm Forecaster quite late because a lot of players aren't interested in playing the cards that make up the Dragonstorm Forecaster package, and because the Boulder-Born Dragon is pretty weak and the Dragonstorm Globe is underrated, you can often assemble that package. So if you see a Dragonstorm Forecaster, don't be afraid to take it and put it in your deck, because if you have one of each of the cards, it can definitely do some good work and help you win more games, especially with a package of cards that is really easy to pick up late in packs, which is really nice upside to have for this sort of card. The final card we're discussing is Einok Wayfarer. For 1 and a green, you get a 1/1. When this creature enters, mill 3 cards. You may put a land from among them into your hand. If you don't, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This card is very, very good. So a 2 mana 1/1 that got you a land would just be a good card. That's just, you get some stats, you get a card advantage because you get that card from your deck, and then if you can ever trade the 1/1 for something or sacrifice it to an effect, then you come out ahead. So because a 1/1's not really like a full card worth of a creature, sometimes that doesn't work out, but even if you end up just chump blocking with this to gain like 4 or 5 life in the mid to late game, still a pretty good deal. Now the thing is players hate milling cards. They hate self-mill because they always hate that fear of milling one of their best cards. But in this set, mill is actually really beneficial. There are cards with the renew ability that you can exile from your graveyard to get value. There are also cards that have harmonize in this set. So if you mill one of those over, you can flash it back to get value. And Einok Wayfarer also plays well with cards that care about cards leaving your graveyard, because you play the Einok Wayfarer, mill 3 cards, and then you put the land from among them into your hand, which will trigger any cards that care about cards leaving your graveyard. Overall, this is a really premium 2-drop and one you should be taking highly. Don't be afraid of the self-mill. Rejoice in the self-mill instead, and take this card highly and be happy. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, remember to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe for more, and leave hashtag 10deals in the comment section down below to let me know you made it all the way to the end, because these cards are bargains that you'll be able to get a little bit later than you might expect, and ones that you'll be pretty happy getting as a result.